for learning. But I would like to give the audience some time to address some of the issues or ask questions. I promised ample time, and it seems like I have 20 minutes. But there will be a reception following this event where you can meet individual presenter at the Global Lounge, and you can still carry on your conversation. So don't be discouraged if you did not get a chance to ask questions in this open session. So now I would like to invite questions. And when you're asking questions, could you address any particular presenter that you would like this question to go to? And that will be very helpful. Thank you. Yes, we'll start with Dr. Chung.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I wanted to hear something about the latest development of weapons at the speed of light. Because we are talking about deterrence and so on. I thought like mechanical weapons or nuclear weapons. We are talking about weapons at the speed of sound. How about weapons at speed of light? Like President Reagan really tried to develop a Star Wars game. Where do we stand with
that? So the U.S. has gotten interested in what we call directed energy weapons, which are basically using high-powered lasers to either defend, right now it's being used mostly for missile defense. The problem is that it takes a lot of energy to generate a laser that can travel far enough and burn a hole in a missile or a warhead. So I think it's right now still pretty much experimental. There are hopes that you could develop lasers that would be small and portable and would be cheap enough to use to defeat large swarms of missiles or UAVs. But there's I think some fundamental technical challenges that are making that difficult now. But the U.S. is investing heavily. I assume Russia and China are as well. So this is probably an area where you will see more competition among the powers trying to develop more effective weapons along these lines.
electron beams or ion beams?
I'm not familiar with those, so I can't speak to that.
We have Professor Kwok and then Professor.
Yes, hi, and thank you very much for being with us. It's a great opportunity for me to hear all you talking about recent issues in Korean Peninsula. I don't want to monopolize questions, but I have questions for each one of you. So if you have time. First question is to the Professor Lepson. Sometimes discussing about the political issues, Americans and many foreign countries are emphasizing the selection of exact terminologies. President Moon, when he met with President Trump, he discussed about the denuclearization of Korean Peninsula, not North Korea. He chose Korean Peninsula's denuclearizations. But Americans' point of view, I wonder whether Mr. Trump and American politicians are looking for the North Koreans' denuclearization issues. That was a question to you. And second question is to Professor Koblenz, and it's about the U.S. and China, the containment policy. I want to be more specific about this issue, whether the North Korea and U.S. this nuclear issue is mainly part of or derivatives of U.S.-China policies. Because after the 1991, the old Soviet Union was collapsed, the new power was rising after 2008 economic kind of chaos, or whatever, crisis. So is it the goal of, the major goal is the relationship, new setup of relationship between US and China, and as a derivative of that policy, this Korean Peninsula issue is kind of pop out. as an important kind of intermediate things. And the other question is to Professor Sonia. You talked about bioweapon. Do we have evidence? We don't have any evidence. We don't have any statistics about North Korea. When I was at the Washington, D.C., IMF and World Bank people came to my office, asked me whether they can have some North Korean, any kind of statistics. Because Peterson IIE, CSIS, all those researchers, they complain about the data sets. So we know that when the United States had some invasion or the punishment against Iraq, we know there was based upon some ill or unclear hypothesis. They have WMD kind of stuff. So we want to have that kind of clarification. And last question is to Professor Michael Hanskar. And I don't know whether running back game is better or the passing game is better. But you mentioned about the number of MPV is less than what it should be. But in Korean Peninsula, I think recent conventional war weapon, that's an important issue. But for the Korean people, more important question is wartime operation control should be remained into the United States Joint Army or has to return to Korean Army. And I think the withdrawal of US troop might be on the table. One of the options, if North Korea eliminate their nuclear weapons, then it might be on the table as an option to withdraw from Korean Peninsula. Do you think it's possible? Those are my questions. Thank you for your presentation.
So I'm sure you are correct that we have not yet clarified what we mean by denuclearization and what the North Koreans themselves mean by it. I think you are correct that from President Trump's perspective, it's North Korea that's on the defensive. They're the ones in the penalty box. They're the ones who are supposed to denuclearize. But I don't think he realizes how much history there is of whether this has to be reciprocal, whether there has to be some larger arrangement that would include concessions on all parties to make the Korean Peninsula a zone of peace, or to basically reduce the dangers and the levels of threat. In both the Iran and the North Korea cases, I think it's important that these are not countries that have been defeated in war. These are countries that in a sort of non-combat scenario, we're trying to persuade and influence and sort of a voluntary compliance. And so it could lead to war, of course, if there's a failure to comply. But I think the concept that it's a one-way street is not proving to be very successful at the negotiating table.
The question of the relationship between the United States and China and U.S. and North Korea are definitely linked. They're interconnected. But I think that hasn't necessarily always been the case, and it's not that they're not linked, forever. So back in the early 1990s, when the United States first dealt with the North Korean nuclear challenge and we negotiated directly with the North Koreans for the agreed framework, China was not really part of that process at all. It was only in the early 2000s under the George W. Bush administration that the U.S. purposely engaged China to bring them in to the 4-party talks and 6-party talks to use them as leverage against North Korea. And so there is a strong desire to work with China on this issue. At the same time, the U.S. clearly has other issues with China around trade, around the South China Sea, that are separate, distinct from our relationship with North Korea. And likewise, with North Korea, we are pursuing objectives that the Chinese probably share, but are being done again in kind of separation from the way we're pursuing our policy with China. And I think if you look now, unfortunately, when you look at the Trump administration policy, policy is a strong word. We do not have a clear and consistent approach to either China or North Korea. And so I think that's causing a lot of confusion in both China and on the Korean Peninsula in terms of what is our policy, because I don't think there is one single policy. I think there are a couple of different policy initiatives being put forward at the same time, some of which are complementary, some of which are contradictory. And we have not yet figured out what that's going to mean. So I think we just have to stay tuned.
When Mr. Trump talked about Mr. Moon, that Kim Jong-un's position like changed after he met with Xi Jinping. When he talked about it, he pointed out somehow to listen from some the reasons why Mr. Moon, think that happened. So on that base, I think there is some relations or message or bluffing kind of card is thrown to that table, telling that China don't try to interrupt this kind of discussions with North Korea. So I wonder whether, as you said, it is completely independent matter between North Korea.
On nuclear weapons, but it hasn't happened yet.
Ambassador?
Thank you very much. My name is Ganbol Basanjab, Ambassador of Mongolia in Korea. And firstly, my apologies for coming late, and sorry, Chris, I kept you waiting. So this is not really a question to anybody. So I just want to share very briefly about my thoughts. So we in Mongolia are very keen about the developments, what's going on now in the Korean Peninsula and between South and North Korea, between U.S. and North Korea. So it is our foreign policy, Mongolia's foreign policy doctrine that U.S. Military presence in Asia Pacific is a stability factor. And we try to develop very active political and economic cooperation with South Korea, Japan, and U.S., and calling them in combination as a third neighbor, just to counterbalance to the growing political and economic influence of our immediate two neighbors, Russia and China. So whatever is the outcome of the U.S. and North Korean summit, so I think that will change the regional dynamics of security and economy in a profound way. So we, frankly speaking, in Mongolia, we little worry about, so what will be the response from Russia and China? So whether these developments will make them more assertive or of course sensitive, or if not aggressive. So I'm wondering, so whether we, I just want to encourage all panelists to think maybe in the future, so how we could make these security guarantee, for example, to North Korea, make it more as a multilateral security mechanism, covering the whole Northeast Asia, including Mongolia, for example. And also those economic assistance or possible economic assistance or whatever, the economic cooperation arrangement between U.S. and North Korea, also make it more also comprehensive, for example. For example, the railway that would interconnect between South and North Korea, that should eventually go to Europe. It has through either Russia, either through China. So then we should try to have some arrangement between Mongolia, South Korea, or North Korea, or maybe Russia, China, and US. For example, so some percentage of Mongolia's export items, including mineral products, should go through this railway or through to North Korean ports, seaports, or South Korean seaports. Some guarantee or some favored treatment for Mongolia's export, or make Mongolia more interconnected to those economic and infrastructure network that might be eventually be created after, if we are successful in this grand deal between U.S. and North Korea involving regional countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. I think I'm gonna have another 5-10 minutes to collect the questions collectively so that you can have your final wording and addressing the questions. I think we started a little bit late, so I think you can bear with us for another 10 minutes, I suppose. So there are 3 questions I saw. So I actually got Andreas, Dr. Roland. Okay, and then I don't identify, or there's like another guest, so why don't we actually collect the 4 or 5 questions for today? Starting from Andreas.
Hi, my name is Hoan Choi from George Mason University, Korea, majoring in management. And a few months ago, on the news, I watched what was the conference between Korea and the US government. Someone from the US government asked the Minister of Diplomacy if the Korean government is considering to assassinate Kim Jong-un. And she said they are seeking for peaceful solutions. But is assassinating Kim Jong-un a viable strategy, really?
Hi, my name is June Park, and I'm a research fellow at the Seoul National University Asia Center. I missed the first hour of the discussions, and I'm very sorry about that. My question goes to Dr. Michael Hunziker, and I'd like to tease you out a little bit on your research focuses on the role and the importance of conventional battle, should I say, or conventional sort of military capability. But the way I see it, I'm a political economist, so budgetary issues are pretty serious nowadays in the United States. And if you look at this from a more geo-economic perspective, would you see that your suggestion as a policy suggestion would be appealing to the U.S. Congress, still, undertaking these tasks in allied countries and maintaining troops when there is discussion that 3,000 troops have to be pulled out from the Korean Peninsula?
Just very quickly, thank you to everybody. Assuming that as part of the upcoming negotiations, some number of U.S. troops in Korea are on the table, what number would you feel comfortable with maintaining deterrence, but also showing some of the political initiatives that might need to be shown?
Hi, Dr. Wilson here. I'm going to pick on you too, Michael, I'm sorry. When it comes to conventional deterrence, how the United States has done that has slowly morphed over the last 20 or 30 years. And during the latter part of the Reagan administration, it was more based on building a larger Navy. And then the Navy they lost all the power within Congress to get new ships, and so therefore now it switched to more air, leaving out the other forces that need the conventional deterrence as well. So as we think of this, especially for United States and Korean Peninsula, can you tell the audience, especially for the younger scholars in here, about the type of deterrence and how it's different from what we've done the last 10 years and 15, 20 years in the Middle East that has a very flat terrain, and something in the peninsula here where we deal with something 75% mountainous, and therefore the deterrence must be very different in how we look at that.
Let's collect a couple questions from this side before.
Hi, my name is Victor. I'm from Utah. My question is this. Northeast Asia is of economic interest to the U.S. China seems to be the elephant in the room. And the exclusion of China so far in developments within Northeast Asia can be interpreted by Beijing as being undermined. What's the role of China in this region? And is America not trying to contain China with these moves?
Any other question? One or two?
So I saw some videos about taken by some North Korean defector recently, and he said that North Korea will never give up its nuclear weapons because it's the key symbol of sustaining its regime. It's like, so if North Korea doesn't forfeit its nuclear weapons, and then U.S. will keep maintaining its extreme sanctions, economic sanctions, but China is helping North Korea, which will kind of void the U.S. sanctions. Then, if North Korea will not do any more nuclear tests or some provoke U.S. might not be able to justify its military actions against North Korea. So then, do you think North Korea, if they don't take any more additional actions, military actions, they will have nuclear weapons, and then this kind of status dynamics will last, and the U.S. cannot do anything more?
Okay, I would like to give Lieutenant General.
Yeah, this question is directed to Dr. Koblitz. You stated that strategic stability does not look good. Can you elaborate on that statement?
Okay, I saw two more hands, so I think I will close the question with those two, and then I will give the floor to address the questions.
Okay, hello, my name is Jung Lee, and I'm a student from George Mason University, Korea. I have each question to Dr. Gregory Koblitz and Dr. Michael Hunziker. For Dr. Gregory Koblitz, I would like to ask, why would Kim Jong-un crave for such a nuclear weapon and detrimental bioweapon? Moreover, how can the U.S. government provide the quid pro quo? How can they compensate North Korea to denuclearization? And for Dr. Michael Hunziker, I would like to ask, as you have emphasized the ground troops, and as a student who successfully completed a military service of approximately 2 years, I'd like to ask you a question in terms of the conscription system of South Korea. While serving in the army, I've realized that the number of troops are in fact redundant. In your personal facet, what do you think about the current conscription system in South Korea? Do you really consider the systems as necessary?
Thank you. I think I'm going to close the question here, but don't be discouraged. You can stay on and then talk to the presenters. I think, Michael, you are the most popular person here. You have quite a few questions. Would you like to start, and then we'll pass on to the next speaker?
So I'll do my best. I've taken shorthand, so I apologize in advance if I don't quite nail the question on the head. To the last question about South Korea's conscription system, I think that is an excellent question. I do not at all want to claim to be the kind of expert I think that would be necessary. I think the systems by which all military organizations in their states sort of raise, train, and equip forces to fight are very unique and require a lot of expertise to understand. I don't want to claim to understand that, but I think it is a very important question, especially given the topics I was talking about. As to the question of congressional appetite, I am concerned that there would not be sufficient political domestic support, and in fact that's one of the major reasons I engaged in this research project, and I've actually done 2 briefings to congressional staff members based on some of these findings. I do think that historically, when the narrative has been presented to Congress and the strategic imperative has been made clear, they have been supportive. And as an example, the quote I took from Thomas Schelling about what can 7,000 troops do, if you go back to some of the congressional records in the early stages of the Cold War, when they made the decision to allow the U.S. to base families with service members overseas, right? The logic was quite cold in terms of why you wanted to let families be over there, because it increased U.S. casualties and increased the likelihood the U.S. would intervene. And yet, despite this, Congress kind of agreed that the logic was sound and the necessity was there. So I think it is possible. I think it does require greater research. And to be perfectly honest, there just have not been that many scholars who have been willing to kind of delve into this very, I think, important issue. To the question of the appropriate number of troops on the Korean Peninsula, again, I think that requires a level of kind of expertise that I don't want to claim to have. I would, however, make the argument that whatever the appropriate number is, it should not involve the reduction of the 2 brigade combat teams that we have. Right? It's the actual combat power I'm most concerned about. I do think that there are all sorts of redundancies, certainly in the U.S. all-volunteer force even, that could be eliminated in ways that I think would kind of look like we're doing meaningful reductions without actually necessarily damaging our ability to project power on the ground. And the final question about kind of this long-standing subtle shifts in the sort of forces that we've been able to field. So I was part of this interesting phase in the US military where I came in before 9/11, September 11th attacks, and I trained for a particular type of conflict and then spent the next 5 years of my military service in Iraq doing counterinsurgency. And it is really interesting the degree to which the military had to change how it trained its personnel and the type of equipment it acquired. And in particular, relevant to this kind of question of projecting power, the US military really shifted from this idea that we might have to fight our way in or deal with a contested environment to a world where we could safely deploy. You knew years in advance when your deployment was coming. You would get on an airplane, usually chartered by a civilian agency. You would fly into Kuwait and you'd marry up with your gear. You'd have months and months and months of kind of training and preparation. And that training and preparation and the gear, the mine-resistant vehicles that we invested heavily in and now find ourselves kind of burdened with, which are not appropriate for mountain warfare, right? Those came at a zero-sum cost. There's only 24 hours in a day. They came at a zero-sum cost to our ability to train to the very, very complex details of conventional warfare in general, and in particular, I think this is very relevant to Korea, to trench warfare. So my real area of focus is on the First World War, and I've studied quite extensively what it took to learn how to fight in trenches in the first place, and I'm very skeptical that our forces today could kind of do that at a level that would be acceptable to the American people, the kind of casualties we would have to deal with.
The second popular presenter, Dr. Koblenz.
So to the question about whether North Korea is going to actually disarm, I don't think Kim Jong-un has any intention of giving up any of his nuclear weapons. His definition of denuclearization, as raised before, is very broad. It's very in the future. I mean, he talks about denuclearization the same way that President Obama does, sometime in the future, not in his generation. So I think this is really a rhetorical ploy that U.S. officials inadvertently or not have kind of adopted North Korean rhetoric without realizing that North Korea means it in a totally different way. So I'm very skeptical there will be any meaningful efforts to disarm North Korea of any of its weapons of mass destruction. But I think because the way that Kim has played this out, and he's gotten the summit meeting that may or may not happen, I think even if the summit doesn't happen, or if the summit kind of falls apart for whatever reason, he'll be in a good position to say, well, I tried diplomacy, I got rid of my nuclear test site, I was willing to meet with the president, it didn't happen, or didn't turn out the way we wanted to, but I'm trying to be responsible. I'm trying to be a good nuclear weapon state. And so he's going to use an argument with China to say, it's not our fault, it's the Americans, and use that as a way to try and get China to relax some of the tougher sanctions they put in place the last couple of years. So I'm a pessimist, but that's the way I see it playing out. On the issue of strategic stability and why I think the trends are going the wrong direction in Asia, so it's not just the fact you have proliferation of these kind of capabilities, precision missiles, cyber weapons, nuclear weapons, but it's being done in a region that there are no arms control or non-proliferation mechanisms in place. There is no real international regime that's limiting the development of these weapons by the different countries in the region. And so I think that's, the ambassador mentioned the need for multilateral security mechanism in Northeast Asia that might go away to alleviating some of these concerns. But right now, the competition that's happening among these different countries for these capabilities is pretty much unrestrained. And I think that is what's contributing to this. Secondly, there are a lot of flashpoints. There are a lot of points of friction between the United States, Japan, China, South Korea, North Korea, that could flare up into a crisis. Japan and China have disputes over islands. South Korea and North Korea have a very long-standing dispute. And so there are a number of different places within the Asia-Pacific region where you could see countries having claims that right now are just rhetorical. You could see it escalating in different ways. So it's this combination of increasing capabilities, no real mechanism to alleviate tensions and reduce crises, and all these flashpoints that could serve to trigger a crisis provides a combination of factors that are, I think, more unsettling than other regions of the world right now.
Dr. Leeson?
So I'll just take two of the questions very quickly. The regime change question, which I think was, why don't we just, why doesn't someone get rid of the Kim regime? I would just say the dynasty has lasted for over half a century. We should have no illusions that any outside actor could either do the deed or that could accept what the secondary consequences of an external regime change strategy would be. I just wish the Trump administration would reflect very carefully. And I'm not suggesting that they've made any movement in that direction, but I think they sometimes talk as if regime change in Iran would be desirable, etc. And to me, the consequences of Iraq just still hang very heavy over American foreign policy, and I think you just have to very, very seriously weigh the costs of all the unintended consequences of that kind of interaction. I just think it is not in our interest to even contemplate that kind of intervention. We just can't control what happens the day after. On China, I think it is sort of what is the strategy today. I think in President Trump's national security strategy that was released in December of 2017, took a very tough line on China. The notion was that both China and Russia are pursuing policies that are antithetical to U.S. interests. And in one place, the document says that China has expanded its power at the expense of sovereignty of others. So you could see the United States trying to protect the sovereignty of countries that might fall under Chinese influence. I think the creation of this quad of large democratic countries, Australia, Japan, India, the United States, is a form of containment of China, even if we're not using that word. And I think the administration has taken a decision that is a little bit surprising, because President Trump also believed that his friendship with President Xi would create opportunities for cooperation between the United States and China. But I think we seem to be going in a more mistrustful direction right now.
Thank you. I think that pretty much addressed the question. If there was any question left out, I mean, once again, we will be here for another 40 minutes in the Global Lounge. You can approach any of them. They're very friendly, so you can talk to them anytime. And I think this concludes our symposium on international security, Asia and beyond, and hopefully this really expanded your thinking about international security, and also you could relate this to this particular region at this exciting time of the year. And please watch out what's going to happen in the summit in the future. And I think I would like to invite these people again. But before that, before I close down, could you please join me giving them a big hand, like big round of applause?